Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we're going to continue this week with our series, The Laughter of Yitzchak. And again, I didn't want to give shir tonight, mamish. I'm just tired, but it's Parshas Toldos, and Parshas Toldos. How can a person not talk about the laughter of Yitzchak? It's like the Alter Rebbe Schusia Ganalenu taught us that a person has to live with the times. And if we're in the Parshios of Yitzchak, look, the entire Torah is Yitzchak. The entire Torah is Mipi Hagvura. To understand the shirish of the Torah, which is the Osios Chakika, the engraving of the Torah. Chakak, we see, is the gematria of 208, which is the gematria of Yitzchak. That Yitzchak is the act of writing of the Torah itself. But nevertheless, in Parshas Toldos, where we're encountering Yitzchak Avinu Mamish, so it's kedai to be mamshich in the shirim that we're giving. Now, what we saw in last week's Parsha was that Yitzchak Avinu had to be born, had to emerge out of impossibility. And that birthplace of possibility from within impossibility was the origin, was the movement, was the nace, was the Yeshua that came after the Yeyush that gives birth to Yitzchak Avinu. But prior to that, Yitzchak Avinu was an impossibility. And it's that impossibility, that hopelessness, that nakuda of the fact that things are lost in this world is what we're going to focus on for this shir. So the tshuka, or the laughter of Sarah, was on one level or another connected to a sense of impossibility, the impossibility of life, the impossibility of the emergence of something new after that which is old has slowly but surely come to its ending. Avram and Sarah were older. There was an ending that was taking place. There was the progression towards the end, and the laughter of Sarah on a certain level was the cackle, so to speak, that we find, or a remnant of the cackle, that negation of laughter that we find in Mishlei of the Stoikak seal, that nihilistic laughter that laughs at life and says everything is going to die, everything falls apart, everything is transient. How could it be that something new could take place? And that laughter of Sarah carried a remnant of it. Which means to say, and for the sake of our understanding, the impossibility that Sarah Imenu was perceiving that caused her to have somewhat of a negative laughter was rooted in her awareness, her sense of the fact that things fall apart, the center cannot hold, things die. Birth doesn't continue. It's not going to be a new level of revelation. And so what we find is that Sarah Imenu's death, the death of Sarah Imenu, the departure of Sarah Imenu's encounter with the ending of things, possibly the very thing that caused her to have that negation of laughter, is a tikkun to this very concept that she brings into the world. Sarah Imenu's concern on a certain level is the concern of death. Things fall apart. Everything is transient. There can be no rebirth. There can be no laughter in this world. How could a person laugh in this world? As the Gemara in Brachos says. And the tikkun and the rectification of that laughter, as the Sfas Emes tells us, that the whole process of these parshios is not the negation of laughter, but the rectification of laughter. The movement of laughter, that laughter of Yitzchak, as it emerges out of negation into that affirmative laughter of possibility that we spoke about. And so we see Sarah Imenu dies as a result of Akedas Yitzchak, as Chazal tell us, and instead of encountering a parsha about Misa, which is what the entire parsha is about burial, about kvura, about hesped. But the Torah itself is referred to as Chayei Sarah. It's the life of Sarah. We see this also with Yaakov Avinu, as we're going to see, because this midah of Sarah Imenu's tikkun, this rectification of the imagination in its relationship with the ending of things, with Misa, is the very light that Yaakov Avinu, Slusei Ganalenu, brings into the world, which is why it's Parshas Vayechi, where we learn about Yaakov Avinu's Misa, the very same thing that we encounter with Chayei Sarah. And so the moment that Sarah loses her life, the moment that Sarah dies, the moment that Sarah comes face to face with the ending of things, meaning Hashem says, okay, Yitzchak could come into the world. And then the trick of the Yetzer Hara, the Malach HaMavis, was to show Sarah that even though there was a new beginning, it's still ending. There's a shchita here. That was the Nisayon of the Akedah. And Sarah hears this, and Parcha Nishmasa, that she dies as a result of that, she expires. And what the Rebbe, Rav Yitzchak Meyer Morgenstern Shlita, points out in this week's packet, in the packet of his teachings from this week, is the idea that Sarah's entire experience in relationship to the Akedah was not a misa by way of degradation or a descent, because Sarah is referred to as one of those who never sinned. It can't be a disintegration, but rather Sarah's misa was a misa that emerged out of hiskabrus hachayim, she became more alive. She became so alive that even Misa, the concept of endings, was nichlal, contained within and subsumed within the concept of rejuvenation and renewal. So that for Chayei Sarah, for Sarah, her derech and Misa, that Mesiras Nefesh lemala, not being killed in a way of going below, this despondent kind of death-bringing speech associated with this nihilistic, negative expression of death and all of its impossibility, but rather an affirmation of the fact that, okay, so to live in this world means that a person has to encounter endings, has to encounter the hargasha that something is impossible, but nevertheless, it's vatislach liyom acharon. But Tislach Liyom Acharon is specifically the last day, the contemplation of the fact that things fall apart, that gives birth to the need and the necessity of laughter, because how else is a person going to handle it? That V'tislach Liyom Acharon, that Sarah Imenu brings into the world by rectifying, by dying by way of dveikus, of being in such dveikus, the Rebbe describes, of connecting to the highest kavanos, the highest intentions and reverberations and ripple effects of the spiritual impact, the psychological impact of the notion of the Akedah, the impossibility of that nisayon. Sarah Imenu expired through the elevation with that encounter, which is why we learn about love. We learn about love and connectivity and chayim from Sarah. Eishes Chayil Ataras Baila, the love song that the Jewish people sing for the Shechina HaKadosha, is born out of the hesped that Avram Avinu, the Amud HaChesed, gives for his wife Sarah. How could it be? How could the celebration of love and life be described in a hesped, in something that's a reaction to death? Elamah, the death of Sarah was an elevated death. It was an ascent upwards, where there was an acceptance of the fact that things fall apart at a certain point. And things don't last forever. And that transiency will cut through every element of human being's life, except the only thing to do about it is to find emunah, faith, bitachon, and laughter in it. That's Eishes Chayil. And we see Yitzchak Avinu is then ready to come into the world. Because Yitzchak Avinu is the true rectification of Misa. Yitzchak Avinu represents Misa, what Sarah was afraid of, the possibility and the impossibility of something new, or the fact that something new falls apart, the transiency of things, which was the source of her negative laughter. And Yitzchak comes to rectify all of that, because Yitzchak comes to be that paradox that reveals that presence, absence, something, nothing, they're all part and parcel of the same unified expression of the infinite light that remains forever slightly beyond their grasp, and therefore only accessible by way of a faith that is beyond any rational assumption of grasp or understanding of any level. Yitzchak comes to teach us that laughter. And the Rebbe says as follows. The Rebbe says that after the death of Sarah, after this elevation of where we can look at the death of Sarah, the revelation that things fall apart and things end, and say shira to it, like David HaMelech, who was mistakel alayom mamisa v'amar shira, Chazal say. David HaMelech looked upon the day of death, and he understood that the concept of death has to be met with singing as well. And again, it's very, very, very important here, very important. And I probably should have said it a few moments earlier. But when we speak about death, Misa, now obviously there is the reality of death, the fact that human beings are singular, and singular as a species, it seems, that live with death awareness, that are perpetually, consciously or unconsciously, aware of the fact of their mortality, which is the drive of all cultural development and the attempt to fight against death, the denial of death. And so death means what it means. And God forbid a person should always live till 120 and life should be good, and Yamim Marichim, there should be a time where death is completely swallowed up, where there's a hamshach of Chaim, of Chai HaChaim, of Chaim Sha'al Mimcha, the light of Mashiach Tzidkenu, the light of Chai Amitim. But until then, there's a concept of Misa in the world, but also so that the idea becomes a psychologically and spiritually meaningful one that can be applied to day-to-day experience without falling, God forbid, into some morose kind of pathological obsession over difficulty and death. Chazal tell us something very clear, and it's brought down in the Safed Tzniusa from the Vilna Gaon, that Misa, that the concept of Misa doesn't mean actual death, but rather anytime there's a degradation, anytime a person descends from one level that they were at to a level below what they were just previously at, can be considered an experience of Misa. And said, though, yes, there's the capital D death that each and every person lives with an awareness of, But there's also the lowercase d death or the lowercase t traumas of everyday life that disrupt and end previous levels, and that's also considered death. And therefore, everything we're talking about in the conversation about Yitzchak and the hismoidedus with Misa, and the hismoidedus with finding life at the heart of death, is not about death, quo death, but rather every concept of a Yerida. The Yerida is death, Shechacha is death, darkness is death. It just means something that was possible now has fallen back into impossibility. And so that's what we're talking about. That's the sugya that we're being made upon right now from one perspective. And after describing the process of the elevation that Sarah experienced in her awareness and acceptance and the vision that everything is within the purview of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even death, the Rebbe writes as follows: This is the birthplace of the relationship, of the loving relationship between Yitzchak and Rivka, which is the light of Mashiach, which is the laughter of Mashiach, which is the elevation of Yitzchak Avinu above the other avos, in the sense that that which is difficult is transformed and revealed to be the seat of the excitement and the joy and the laughter of that last day. Ve'elu told us Yitzchak, ve'elu told us Haskoik to the Asid Lavo, like the Zohar Kadosh says. And this is Meruma, says the Rebbe, in the word Yitzchak itself. Rav Yitzchak Meyer Morgenstern is pointing out that the word Yitzchak is a lashon of Schoik sheyitzachik la'asid lavo. That the word Yitzchak, the name Yitzchak, is the implication of a future joy that will be laughed in the future. Like we said, that Yitzchak is going to redeem the world from all of the severity that is going to emerge in the future, and it's going to be by judging the Jewish people favorably. And causing Hashem and the Jewish people to realize that it's all been one big joke. And furthermore, and the Rebbe continues to say that this encounter that Sarah Imenu has with hismoidedus of death, and transforming it from its severity into something that one laughs with and lives with and cultivates a life with, that is the birthplace of Yitzchak Avinu. And that is the birthplace we see of Eishes Chayil, of the true love and connectivity. And we see this with Yitzchak and Rivka as well. Yitzchak and Rivka, the first encounter of this type of shidduch, of this type of connectivity, of this type of zivug, of this type of preparation from beforehand, we see a direct totza'ah. What is it that happens after the love of Yitzchak and Rivka? There's nechama. There's nechama, v'yinachem Yitzchak. Yitzchak finds nechama. He learns how to find comfort after the death of his mother, Sarah. And so we see the very same thing that's happening in the love between Avram and Sarah, which is revealed by in and through the relationship with death, is happening also in the loving relationship between Yitzchak and Rivka, which is the revelation of Nechama, which is only possible by dint of the fact that there was a loss previously. That descending into the world with death itself is the possibility of Nechama, the Nechama at the heart of it all. Which is why Nachamu Nachamu, which we say after the biggest Misa, the Misa of the presence of the Shekhinah in a revealed way to Klal Yisrael, we say Nachamu Nachamu, which is the Gematria of Yitzchak, because Yitzchak is the Shorish of Nachama. Because the tikkun of Misa, the proper relationship with Misa, the changing of one's minds from the language of Vayinachem Hashem, the source of comfort that emerges in the guise of Nechama, is rooted in the fact that it's a shifting of the way I look at things, a shift in the way that I'm mismoded, that I think about death. And that nechama that Yitzchak Avinu brings into the world is the same birthplace of love, the loving connection, that ahava aza kamavis, that love that is as strong as death. We only learn that out from the encounter and the hismoidus and the acceptance of the fact that there's such a thing, that things fall apart in this world and things don't last forever and certain things are impossible. Now Yitzchak Avinu, like we said, comes into the world to fix this, to teach us what it means to be a human being, who lives in a world of Misa. What does it mean to live with death awareness on whatever level it is? What does it mean to always be stuck in that feeling that whatever is going on right now that is alive in my life is standing at the precipice to end and to die on a certain level? Some have this volume very loud, some have it lower down, but everybody is in a state of some form of anticipatory anxiety over the eventual ending of things that are happening right now. And that's a difficult, very serious, very sobering feeling. And so the question that tzaddikim ask is, if Yitzchak represents this din, this gevura, this awareness of suffering, this awareness of misa in the world, this inyan that Sarah Imenu had to be mismoded with, that Yitzchak fixes with Yitzchak and Rivka. So what's so funny? Why in the world would a person like this, associated with this type of awareness, be associated with something funny, with a language of laughter? And this is really what we're talking about in all of these shirim. So we've had some answers, and now let's look at what another tzaddik by the name of Yitzchak Meyer. So we looked at Rav Yitzchak Meyer Morgenstern Shlita, and now we're looking at Rav Yitzchak Meyer Alter of Gur, the Chiddushei Harim. Yitzchak Meyer, again, the language of that name represents that the light of Yitzchak, which is light of Mashiach, and that way of looking at things in a different way, it shines in the future. It's Meir. It's a lashon of Meir, which is the Rosh Tevos of Ruach HaPeinu Mashiach Hashem, which is the whole sugya of Hashavas Aveda. Eloi Kaider Rabbi Meir Aneni. Eloi Kaider Rabbi Meir Aneni. This inyan of being machzir avedos to a person. This inyan of being machzir something that is lost. I have something, it's alive. I lose something, it's dead. Meir Einenu is the revelation that the death-bringing experience of this world is illuminated in the light of Rabbi Meir. And so Yitzchak Meir, this inyan that we're going to see from the Chiddushei Harim, and what we saw from the Rebbe, it's Yafa Amartem B'Shem Oimro, meaning these tzaddikim specifically on one level or another, in accordance with our understanding, are teaching the very aspect of what their names are. So the pasuk says, "Schleik asa li Elokim," that Hashem made a laughing matter for them. The Pella Hadavar says the Chiddushei Harim, "Heichan matzinu lashon schok al simcha, lashon schok anu matziim al chadvasa de bedichusa." So we don't see schok is not happiness. Schok is not necessarily joy. Schok is not something that we find associated with an easy way of looking at things, a life devoid of awareness of death. But rather, we find the word tzlok associated with chedvasa de bedichusa, comedy. It's a very different thing. It's a subversive thing. It's a subversive thing. It destabilizes things. Rabbi David Bashevkin speaks about this a lot. This inyan of the subversive and redemptive power of laughter. And so it's different. It's not joy. We're not seeing here a language of Yitzchak is joyous as if he's not aware of the difficulty in the world. But rather, what do we find? We find it on chedvasa de bedichusa, poking a hole in something. That's the type of stoik. So what's pshat? Eli Yitzchak Avinu alav hashalom hayla oilam hazeh rak l'maras ayin. In truth, so you want to hear the comedy here? You want to hear the comedy at the heart of Yitzchak Avinu's life? So fine. We'll say that type of death awareness, that's not joy. Okay, but there's something comedic about it. Yitzchak Avinu was only in this world in accordance with the mara of the ayin, the way I perceive things. But in truth, Yitzchak Avinu was killed at the Akedah. He was nechshav as a perfect korban. As the pasuk says, that bring him as a sacrifice. V'chal alav din oila, and the din of oila, the din of death, the din of aliyah saneshama, a way of dying in a way that is growth oriented, relating to death in a way that is growth oriented, by including that which is frightening, by making room for that which is the opposite of what we conceive as growth to be part of the process. He accepted that upon himself. Hainu shelo haya nikar b'shum davar. He didn't exist. You couldn't recognize anything on him. V'haya asr b'haina. And he was asr, he had a din of kudshim. He was not allowed to partake in pleasure. That's why he had to be in Gan Eden, a place beyond pleasure. V'haya asr b'hana. V'gam li Yitzchak haya asr lahana me'atzmo. And even Yitzchak couldn't tell himself the heart of the joke. He couldn't find benefit from himself, even this awareness. The afrot sabr al gabei mizbeach, and we know that his afar is munach al gabei mizbeach. He died. L'chein nikra Yitzchak, and this is why it's comedy. What's funny here? Shazehu schayk shenira kiyuladisha. It appears that he's down here in this world. Ki'iluhu ba'olam hazeh, as if he lived in this world. Mashal l'maisa eino kain. So we find from the Chiddushei Harim is that the joke, the comedy of Yitzchak is that he's dead and alive. He's dead, he died, he's gone. He's no longer achuz, he's no longer situated, he's no longer attached in a way that gives him a status of being alive in this world, of being part and parcel of the human condition, which is so cut through with the shadow of death. But on the other hand, he's here in this world. He's living in a world of B'nai Tamusa. He's living in a world of changes and shifts. And the joke is, the comedy is how to be both at once. That's the joke of Yitzchak. The joke of Yitzchak is not to deny death and pretend that it doesn't exist and pretend that there's no Yeridos. Adarabba, Yitzchak Avinu's life was being makabel everything without expectation, without reservation, without expectation, without resentment, just presence. The preparation to be, like we said, Yitzchak's entire essence is rooted in Bina. The name associated with Bina is Eheke, Ana Zamin Lemeheve, I am prepared to be. The light of Yitzchak is I am prepared to be. Shchita, not shchita, I'm good. Whatever it is, I'm good. And so what Yitzchak Avinu teaches us is he teaches us the ability to be both at once, to live in a world of an awareness of Misa, but on the other hand, to be able to laugh with it. That's the schleik of Yitzchak. And this is Pshat and Pasuk where it says, Aza kamavas ahava. Aza kamavas ahava, the love is as strong as death. Connection, the schleik, the chibor is as strong as death. The way the Meforshim explain it, as the heart of Shir Hashirim, is that the love is so deep specifically because we're aware of the fact that it is transient. Bringing the transiency into the desire for things to be perpetual is what illuminates the love. The Balatanya, Sefer Atanya, Safran Shel Beinanim is about this love on a certain level. The Ahava Mesuteres, that's Niskala, specifically that hidden, concealed flames and cords of love, Reshpe Eish Kashal Heves Ka, the Gvurus that are nimtak by way of yearning and passionate desire out of the fear that what I love is going to be just a little bit too distant from me, too early, too late. And instead of being messiahish in this, instead of saying the world is filled with death and that we walk in the shadow of death and there's no purpose in anything, we find love in that. Ava, Oza, Kamaves, the love. Okay, things are going to end. There's Misa in the world. There's distance. There's absence in the world. I have this moment. And in that moment, the person throws themselves into the love sickness, the connection. And in that moment, the person finds nitzchias. In that moment, it doesn't matter if a person lives in a world of misa, non-misa, the fact that things end. What difference does it make? All there is this thing right now. All there is what has always been and what will always be. The haya, hoiva, and yihya, ad shenisapech l'mashahaya, ad shenisapech l'mashahaya. That which was, that which is, and that which will be when things revert back to the way things were. Meaning Yitzchak Avinu's whole inyan, the whole joke is to leave perfect unity, descend into a world of Misa, and then come back through a world of Misa, back into a world of perfect unity, and say that even Misa is included in this. Even Misa is included in the perfect unity. That's the joke. And that's why Yitzchak Avinu is going to be able to be Melamed Zchus. The Tikkunei Zohar Kadoshim tell us that Yitzchak is Osios Kates Chai. Yitzchak, the letters of Yitzchak means Kates Chai. Kates means death, it means an ending, Chai means life. What that means is that Yitzchak's entire essence is the preparation to identify love and connection at the heart of the awareness of things ending, to find Nechama in the world, the love of Nechama, the joy of Nechama. To find, like the Leshem Shloy V'Chalema says, another tzaddik who was so makusher to this world of the Gevuros, to this world of sweetening the dinim of Yitzchak. Every page is Mali V'Gadush, is filled, saturated with the light of the sweetening love that emerges specifically out of the encounter with difficulty. And the trans-revolution of Gevuros that are mit'ala above chasadim, the distance, that apparent absence, or that death that we're so all afraid of, is in truth the very sight we have the opportunity to be Magal, the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in our lives in every moment. And Yaakov Avinu receives this. Yaakov Avinu is Chaim even when he's dead, and Esav is dead even when he's alive. Yaakov takes Misa from Esav and he enlivens it. This is why Medrash says something amazing. After Avram Avinu dies, and Yaakov is making his comforting food rooted in that nechama that he receives from Yitzchak and Rivka, and he's trying to comfort Yitzchak. He's trying to bring comfort to Yitzchak. He's trying to reveal to Yitzchak the very pleasure that Yitzchak was unable to have, like the Chiddush Sherem says, to laugh at his own joke. And the pasuk says, "Al tibchi lahoylech, al tibchi lameis el lahoylech." Pasuk in Mishlei says, "Don't cry for the person who has died, I believe it's in Mishlei. Rather, cry for the person who is walking. Don't cry for the person who has died, cry for the person who is walking. And the Medrash says that what this pasuk means is it refers to two ways of relating to death. Rooted in Esav, in that perception of the negation of the death that empties out and removes, versus the affirmation of Yaakov Avinu that sees emptiness and distance and loss as an opportunity to love even deeper, to be mamshich l'chesed of Avram even more. Al tibchi l'meis ze Yaakov. Don't cry for the one who dies, that's Yaakov. Cry for the one who walks, that's Esav. Meaning to say, and Rav Hutner and Rav Hutner's son-in-law, Rav Yonasan David Shlita, this is where I saw this Nakuda in his Ma'amarim, that don't cry for the fact that there's Misa in the world. There's Misa in the world. That's what the whole world emerges out of a state of Misa. The Misa Samalachim, the Tzimtzum is a Misa. The whole world is in Amad Shikra and Amad Misa. That's what it means. It's Lamar Asayin. That's where we're going to be Megala, the deepest Chaim. That's where the joke comes. But don't cry about the fact that there's Misa. That's a Davar Yedua. Person who's unable to look at that, okay, so that's another issue. But acceptance of the fact that things fall apart and things seem to disappear, that's a Metzias. But that comes along with the promise of the Nechama. This is why Yitzchak understood Yaakov as being Menachem Yitzchak. Yitzchak can't be Menachem Yaakov because he knows that Yosef is still alive. And if Yosef is still alive, that means Yaakov knows on a certain level, and to still feel that something is alive prior to fully accepting its death, a person can't find that light b'nechama, perhaps. But don't cry for Yaakov. Don't cry for Yaakov who understands that things die. Tibchi l'hoylech, cry for Esav, cry for he who walks towards it. Where every moment is a tzabrachin moment because it's not going to last forever. Where every moment is broken because it's not perfect. Where everything is bad because it's not good in the way that I expected it to be good. But rather to learn to laugh with life, to laugh like Yitzchak at life, to laugh at the tzabrachenkite, and to laugh at all of it, and to be mitzachek ourselves, and to move forward through laughter. To pick up our legs and to be soichik on the ground, to mamish, to beat down the ground until we're floating. To laugh and to float. When Rivka was brought to Yitzchak through Eliezer and the tzaddikim of Chabad, and the Rebbe Rashab and Hemshech and Nun Zayin describes the speed and the intensity and the passion, everything that Eliezer did, because it was connected to Yitzchak Avinu, because it was connected to this movement. And we'll come back to the Leshem Shoy V'Chalayim in a second. That Rivka is brought to Yitzchak Avinu, and she falls off of her camel. Why does she fall off of her camel? But Chazal tell us that Yitzchak Avinu was coming out of Gan Eden at that point. Yitzchak Avinu, who had encountered death on a certain level, was coming out of Gan Eden. And what was so funny about the way that Yitzchak Avinu came out of Gan Eden, to the extent that Rivka fell off of her camel, it was that he was walking with his hands on the ground and his feet in the air. He was walking in the style of a handstand. Balei Tosfos bring this down. Because that's the whole inyan, to be mahapechet, to do a somersault. The Piyasatzner Rebbe Hashem Yom Komdomu, who lived Begeit Salmavis, he has Torahs in his diary about doing a somersault, in the back and forth, about whether he wants to embarrass himself or whether it's for kavod. But be'emes, the somersault is about the willingness to put our head on the floor and our feet in the air, to look Misa in the eye, and to be megalgel at it, and to be metzachik at it, to laugh at it. And Yaakov Avinu has that ability. Yaakov Avinu has the ability to look at the world that has Misa in it and not to be so afraid of it. And this is what the Leshem Shemar Chalema says. The Leshem Shemar Chalema, who we said spoke so much about life at the heart of Misa, says that we say Tchias HaMeisim in a present tense because it's not something that stands at the ready to be revealed in the future. It's not only something that is going to take place at the end of time. It's something that is happening in every perpetual moment, all of existence, every aspect of existence, something that the Talmud of the Leshem, on a certain level, Rav Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Cook, learned directly from his Rebbe, the Leshem, I believe, even though that's not provable, and I pushed that point a little bit. But they both, two tzaddikim, are speaking on the same language of there's perpetual life, growth, perpetuation of life. Everything is renewing itself. Everything is elevating. Nothing is dying. Even the Misa is not Misa. And all Misa is there is going to be neshapech into Tova when Mashiach Tzidkenu comes on that V'tischak Liyom Acharon. And we say 5 Lashonos of Tchias HaMesim in the bracha of Ata Gibur L'Olam Hashem, because the Yeshua that we saw from the Radziner Tzadikim and the Etzer Tzadikim is that the Yeshua of life after death, of Tchias HaMesim, of impossibility, giving birth to possibility, is rooted in the bracha of Yitzchak. That's why Avimelech had to look twice at Yitzchak. He says, "You're dead. How could you be so alive?" And to end on a practical note, there's a piece that we're going to return back to over and over, Be'ezras Hashem, in these shirim, and it's a piece from Rav Avram Elia Kaplan, Slusi Aganalenu, who is a Talmud Mufak of the Alter of Slobodka, who passed away at a young age. Rav Kook, Rav Soloveitchik, the different tzaddikim, Rav Itzer Zalman Meltzer, everybody saw him as mamish, the apple of the Altar's eye, and his lashonos are kizahav. Kizahav. His poetry is kizahav. Difficult poetry. Shaka chama, shaka nafshi. Im lezois karasi chayim lama karames. If you call this life, what is death called? That's part of the liturgical hymns that made it into like normative nigunim that people sing. And Rav Avram Elia Kaplan has a sefer called the Ikvei Hayira, and he has a mimer on Yitzchak Avinu. And Bekitzer, what he describes the process of Yitzchak Avinu is this passive resistance, lahavdil, of acceptance for the sake of moving forward and never being pulled down by the circumstances of life. To be engaged with the circumstances of life, with the things that come along, with the plishtim that come and take your well, instead of turning towards the problem, instead of turning towards that which is dead in the moment and trying to engage in it and battle and judge with it and deal with it, turn towards what's alive, turns towards the next possibility of going to dig another well, not getting caught up in the misa of the world, but finding chaya chayim, life in everything, which is why Yitzchak Avinu never argues. Yitzchak Avinu goes, he flows, he says, what difference does it make? I thought I was digging that well, now I'm digging this well. It makes zero difference to me. I'm alive. I'm alive. I'm laughing with life. I'm an impossibility. To be alive is an impossibility. To be a neshama beguf is an impossibility. And in that moment, the misa is nimtak. In that moment, we uncover the pockets of potential that exist, specifically within those places that feel difficult. It's going to end. Things are going to end eventually. So let me be here right now. Let me be present right now. Let me be in this moment. Let me laugh with the moment. Let me see what's good in this moment. And Mamela, that's how we're going to move forward. That's the schoik. That's the milsa de b'dichusa that's necessary before learning. The milsa de b'dichusa, the comedy, the absurdity of all things, that is the prerequisite to limud Torah, is that the only life that a person can truly grab hold of is the life in this moment. Is life in this moment of entering into the Torah HaKadosha, into that light of Yitzchak Avinu. And Be'ezras Hashem, we're going to see, I don't want to go so much further, but we'll see how this is very much connected to Lag BaOmer, and this is very much connected to Purim, because what the Mechaber tells us is that the siman that we know that Purim and Lag BaOmer will typically fall out on the same day is Peleg Chai. Peleg Chai falls out on the 18th of Chai. And Peleg Chai is Purim Lag BaOmer Chai. And both Purim and Lag BaOmer are encounters with death. Death of concealment, death in the cave, death of revelation, death of Klal Yisrael, death of the Or of the Tzaddik. And specifically, both places were nisgale through the schoik of Yitzchak, through the schoik of the Arizal, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was the Bechina of Yitzchak, and to Rabbi Yitzchak, the Talmud of Rabbi Shimon, and the Arizal, and the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh. All of these, the tzaddikim are all named Yitzchak. It's all Yitzchak. That's the shirish of the Gilui of Purim, the Gilui of Lag BaOmer, Be'ezras Hashem.